The Valley of Thornmere was not a place where humans ventured willingly. The rocks were sharp, the paths treacherous, and the local wildlife had a reputation for being particularly unfriendly to travelers. Most importantly, it was dragon territory, and everyone knew that dragons did not tolerate intruders. The great beasts had claimed the valley 300 years ago, and since then, an uneasy peace had existed between dragonkind and the human settlements that bordered their lands. Humans stayed out, and dragons did not raid the farms or villages. It was a simple arrangement that had worked well enough for generations. Emma Chen had never been particularly good at following rules. At 19 years old, she had already earned a reputation in her village as someone who asked too many questions and wandered too far from home. Her mother despaired of her constantly, while her father simply shook his head and reminded everyone that Emma had always been curious. The village elders had warned her countless times about the dangers beyond the boundary stones, but Emma could not help herself. She wanted to see what lay beyond the familiar paths and well-trodden roads. On the morning that would change her life forever, Emma had set out before dawn with her gathering basket and a small knife for cutting herbs. She told herself she was only going to the meadow near the boundary, where the best medicinal plants grew. But as the sun rose higher and the day grew warmer, she found herself walking further and further, drawn by the beauty of the landscape and the call of adventure that sang in her blood. The boundary stones were old and weathered, carved with ancient warnings in languages most people could no longer read. Emma paused at them, as she always did, and felt the familiar thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. She knew she should turn back. She knew the stories of what happened to those who crossed into Dragonlands. But the day was beautiful, the sky was clear, and she could see a patch of rare silverwort growing on the other side of the stones. Silverwort could cure fevers and ease pain, and the village healer had been looking for it for months. Just a quick trip, Emma told herself, in and out, and no one would ever know. She stepped across the boundary and immediately felt the change in the air. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The temperature seemed to drop slightly, and there was a quality to the silence that felt different from the ordinary quiet of the forest. Emma shivered but pressed on, her eyes fixed on the silverwort ahead. She gathered it quickly, her hands working with practiced efficiency as she cut the stems and placed them carefully in her basket. That was when she heard the sound. It was small and pitiful, somewhere between a whimper and a squeak. Emma froze, her knife still in her hand, and listened carefully. There it was again, coming from somewhere to her left, behind a cluster of large boulders. Every instinct told her to run, to get back across the boundary as quickly as possible. But the sound was so sad, so desperate, that Emma found her feet carrying her toward it before she could think better of it. Behind the boulders, she found a small cave entrance, barely large enough for her to squeeze through. The sound was coming from inside. Emma hesitated for only a moment before ducking down and crawling through the narrow opening. The cave was dim, lit only by the sunlight filtering in from outside, but her eyes adjusted quickly. What she saw made her gasp. Curled up in the corner of the cave was a baby dragon. It was tiny, no bigger than a large cat, with scales that shimmered in shades of deep blue and silver. Its wings were folded against its body, and they looked paper-thin and delicate. The creature was shivering, and Emma could see that one of its back legs was bent at an awkward angle. The baby dragon looked up at her with enormous golden eyes and made that pitiful sound again. Emma knew she should be terrified. She knew that where there was a baby dragon, there would be a mother dragon, and that mother dragons were notoriously protective of their young. She knew that she was in more danger in this moment than she had ever been in her entire life. But all she could think was that the little creature looked so scared and so hurt, and that it needed help. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, setting down her basket and knife. "What happened to you?" The baby dragon watched her with those huge golden eyes. It did not try to flee or attack. Instead, it made a small chirping sound, almost like a bird. Emma moved slowly, keeping her movements gentle and non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said softly. "Let me see that leg." As she drew closer, the baby dragon tensed, but it did not move away. Emma reached out carefully and ran her fingers over the injured leg, feeling the break in the bone. The dragon flinched, but allowed her to touch it. Up close, Emma could see that the creature was even more beautiful than she had first thought. Its scales caught the light like jewels, and despite its injury and obvious distress, there was something dignified about it. "You're actually really cute," Emma said, surprised by her own words. She had expected to be frightened, but instead she felt a wave of protective affection for the small creature. "Like, ridiculously cute. Look at your little face." The baby dragon tilted its head, studying her with an intensity that seemed far too intelligent for such a young creature. Then slowly it uncurled from its defensive position and crawled closer to her, dragging its injured leg. Emma felt her heart melt. She spent the next hour carefully splinting the dragon's leg, using strips of cloth torn from the hem of her shirt and straight sticks from her kindling bundle. The baby dragon watched her work with fascination, occasionally making small chirping sounds. When she was finished, Emma sat back and admired her handiwork. "There," she said, "that should help it heal. You need to keep off it for a while, though." The dragon chirped again and nudged her hand with its nose. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate, and Emma found herself smiling despite the dangerous situation she was in. She stroked the creature's head, marveling at the smoothness of its scales. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "Your mother is probably looking for you, and I really don't want to be here when she arrives." But as she started to stand, the baby dragon made a distressed sound and grabbed onto her sleeve with one small claw. Emma paused, looking down at the creature. It gazed up at her pleadingly, and she felt her resolve weaken. "I can't stay," she tried to explain. "It's not safe for either of us." The dragon chirped urgently and tugged at her sleeve again. Emma sighed. She knew she was being foolish, but she could not bring herself to leave the injured creature alone in the cave. What if something else found it before its mother returned? What if the mother never returned at all? "Okay," she said finally. "I'll stay a little longer, just until I'm sure you're going to be all right." The baby dragon released her sleeve and settled down against her leg, clearly content with this arrangement. Emma leaned back against the cave wall and tried not to think about all the ways this could go terribly wrong. Instead, she focused on the steady warmth of the small body pressed against her, and the way the dragon's scales seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the cave. Outside, the sun continued its journey across the sky, and Emma knew that people in the village would soon start to worry about her. But for now, in this hidden cave in dragon territory, she felt strangely at peace. The baby dragon began to make a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, and Emma felt it vibrate against her leg. "You really are cute," she whispered again, stroking the dragon's head. "I hope your family comes back soon." The dragon looked up at her with those wise golden eyes, and Emma had the strangest feeling that it understood every word she said. There was an intelligence there that went beyond simple animal awareness, something ancient and knowing that seemed at odds with the creature's small size and obvious youth. As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself telling the dragon stories about her village, about her family, about her dreams of seeing more of the world. The creature listened attentively, occasionally making small sounds that seemed like responses. Emma knew she was being ridiculous, talking to a dragon as if it were a person, but somehow it felt natural and right. She did not hear the sound of massive wings until it was too late. The cave entrance suddenly darkened, and a shadow fell across them both. Emma looked up and felt her blood turn to ice. Blocking the entrance to the cave was an adult dragon, easily 20 times the size of the baby. Its scales were the same deep blue and silver, but they gleamed with a hardness that spoke of age and power. The dragon's eyes, the same golden color as the baby's, fixed on Emma with an expression that was impossible to read. This was it, Emma thought. This was how she died. The adult dragon lowered its massive head through the cave entrance, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Emma pressed herself back against the cave wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The baby dragon, however, seemed delighted by the new arrival. It chirped excitedly and tried to scramble toward the adult, only to be stopped by its splinted leg. The adult dragon's gaze shifted from Emma to the baby, taking in the makeshift splint and the way the small creature was moving. Then those enormous golden eyes returned to Emma, studying her with an intensity that made her feel as if every secret she had ever kept was being laid bare. "I was just helping," Emma managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was hurt." The dragon continued to stare at her for a long moment. Then slowly, it withdrew its head from the cave entrance and moved aside. The meaning was clear. Emma was free to go. She did not need to be told twice. Emma grabbed her basket and her knife and scrambled toward the entrance, squeezing past the massive dragon with her heart in her throat. She had made it halfway out when she heard the baby dragon cry out behind her, a sound of pure distress. Emma paused, looking back despite herself. The small creature was dragging itself toward her, its injured leg making the movement awkward and clearly painful. It was crying, calling for her not to leave. Emma felt tears spring to her own eyes. She looked at the adult dragon, expecting to see anger or threat, but instead she saw something that looked almost like understanding. "I'm sorry," Emma said to the baby. "I have to go home, but you'll be okay now. Your mother is here." The baby dragon's cries grew more desperate. It reached the cave entrance and tried to follow her out, but the adult dragon gently blocked its path with one massive claw. The small creature looked up at its parent and chirped urgently, then looked back at Emma. The message was clear, even across the barrier of species. "Please don't go." Emma felt her heart breaking, but she forced herself to turn away. She walked quickly back toward the boundary stones, not allowing herself to look back, even though she could hear the baby dragon's cries echoing behind her. By the time she crossed back into human territory, tears were streaming down her face, though she could not have said exactly why she was crying. She had done a good thing, she told herself. She had helped a hurt creature and lived to tell about it, though she knew she never would tell anyone. The baby dragon would be fine now with its mother. Everything had worked out for the best. But as Emma walked back toward her village through the gathering dusk, she could not shake the memory of those golden eyes looking up at her with such trust, or the feeling of the small body pressed against her leg. She did not know that in the cave behind her, the baby dragon was making a decision that would bind their fates together forever. She did not know that in the complex social structure of dragonkind, she had just done something unprecedented. And she certainly did not know that calling a dragon cute and meaning it was the highest compliment a human could pay, recognizing the beauty and worth of a creature that most of her kind feared and hated. The next morning, Emma woke to find her entire village in an uproar. She stumbled out of her house, rubbing sleep from her eyes, to find people running toward the village square. Her mother grabbed her arm, her face pale with fear. "Dragons," her mother said. "2 of them, in the square. They've been there since dawn." Emma's stomach dropped. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that this had something to do with yesterday. She ran with the crowd toward the square, pushing through the gathered villagers until she could see clearly. There, in the center of the square, sat 2 dragons. The large adult from yesterday, and the baby, its legs still splinted with Emma's improvised bandage. The adult dragon's eyes swept over the crowd until they found Emma. Then the massive creature lowered its head in what could only be interpreted as a bow. The crowd gasped and fell silent. The baby dragon, spotting Emma in the crowd, began to chirp excitedly and tried to hop toward her on 3 legs. The village elder, a man named Thomas, who had led the community for 30 years, stepped forward cautiously. "What do they want?" he asked no one in particular, his voice shaking. Emma knew. She did not know how she knew, but she did. She stepped forward, separating herself from the crowd, and walked slowly toward the dragons. Her mother called out in alarm, but Emma did not stop. She walked right up to the baby dragon and knelt down beside it. "You followed me," she said softly, reaching out to stroke its head. "You silly thing, you should have stayed with your mother." The baby dragon pressed against her, making that contented rumbling sound again. The adult dragon watched this interaction, then did something that made everyone in the crowd gasp again. It spoke. The words came out in a language that was clearly not made for human throats, but Emma understood them all the same, as if the meaning was being placed directly into her mind. "My daughter has chosen," the dragon said, its mental voice deep and ancient. "She has given you her loyalty, human child. It is a gift that cannot be refused and will not be broken. You called her beautiful when others would have called her monster. You helped her when others would have killed her. You are hers now, and she is yours, until death parts you." Emma stared up at the massive dragon, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. I just helped her because she was hurt. Anyone would have done the same." The dragon's laugh was like distant thunder. "No, human child, anyone would not have. Most of your kind would have run, or tried to capture her, or worse. You saw a hurt baby and helped, asking nothing in return. You called her cute." The word sounded strange in the dragon's mental voice, as if it were a term of great significance. "You recognized her worth. That is why she has chosen you." The baby dragon chirped in agreement and nuzzled Emma's hand. Emma looked down at the small creature, then back up at its mother. "What does this mean, this loyalty?" "It means," the adult dragon said, "that my daughter will be your companion and guardian. She will grow strong and fierce, and she will protect you with her life. It means that you are now part of our family, and we are part of yours. It means that the old boundaries no longer apply to you. You may walk in our lands freely, and we will come to yours when you have need of us." Emma felt the weight of the entire village staring at her. She thought about her quiet life, her simple dreams of adventure within reason, her plans for the future. All of that was about to change, she realized. Everything was about to be different. She could refuse. She could say no, and perhaps the dragons would understand and leave. Perhaps. But she looked down at the baby dragon pressed against her side, trusting and content. And she thought about how scared and hurt it had been in the cave. She thought about how naturally she had helped it, how right it had felt to comfort the small creature. And she thought about what her life would be like, bonded to a dragon, part of a family that spanned two species that had been enemies for generations. "Okay," Emma said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I accept." The baby dragon made a joyful sound and began to hop around her in a circle, forgetting about its injured leg in its excitement. The adult dragon nodded its massive head, looking satisfied. Then it did something even more surprising. It pulled a scale from its own chest, a large, glittering piece of armor that shone like a sapphire in the morning sun, and placed it carefully at Emma's feet. "A gift," the dragon said, "to seal the bond. My daughter is too young to give you one of her own scales, so I give you one of mine. Wear it always, and all of dragon kind will know that you are under our protection." Emma picked up the scale with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch and surprisingly light despite its size. She could feel a strange energy pulsing through it, like a heartbeat. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I'll treasure it." The adult dragon looked at the gathered villagers, who were watching with a mixture of awe and terror. "Let it be known," the dragon's voice echoed in all their minds, "that this human is precious to us. Any harm that comes to her will be answered. Any help given to her will be remembered. The peace between our peoples is strengthened this day, bound by love and loyalty." Then, with a powerful thrust of its wings, the adult dragon launched itself into the air. The wind from its takeoff knocked several people backward, and dust swirled through the square. The dragon circled once overhead, then flew off toward the mountains, leaving Emma standing alone with the baby dragon at her feet. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked around at the familiar faces of her neighbors and friends, seeing shock and confusion, and even some fear in their eyes. She felt suddenly very alone, despite the small creature pressed against her leg. Then her mother pushed through the crowd and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You stupid, brave, impossible girl," her mother said, her voice thick with tears. "What have you gotten yourself into?" Emma hugged her mother back, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I couldn't leave her hurt in that cave, Mom. I just couldn't." Her mother pulled back and looked at the baby dragon, which gazed back with innocent golden eyes. Despite herself, Emma's mother smiled slightly. "She is kind of cute," she admitted, in a terrifying sort of way. The tension broke, and nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Thomas, the village elder, approached carefully, his eyes on the baby dragon. "What will you name her?" he asked Emma. "If she's to be part of our village, she should have a name." Emma looked down at the small dragon and thought for a moment. "Ember," she said finally, "because she's going to grow up to be bright and fierce and warm." The baby dragon, Ember, chirped happily at the name, as if she approved. Thomas nodded slowly. "Very well, Emma and Ember. I suppose we'll all have to get used to having a dragon among us." Over the next few weeks, the village did indeed get used to having a dragon in their midst. Ember proved to be playful, curious, and surprisingly affectionate. She followed Emma everywhere, hobbling along on 3 legs until her injured leg healed enough to bear weight. Children lost their fear of her quickly and would often bring her treats or toys. The adults took longer to accept her presence, but even the most skeptical villagers had to admit that Ember was well-behaved and seemed genuinely fond of Emma. Emma's life changed in ways both large and small. She built a small shelter for Ember next to her house, though the dragon often insisted on sleeping at the foot of Emma's bed, curled up like an oversized cat. Emma's knowledge of herbs and healing became invaluable as she learned how to care for Ember's scales and monitor her health. The dragon grew quickly, her appetite enormous, and Emma spent hours hunting and fishing to keep her fed. But the biggest change was in how Emma was treated by others. Word of the bonding had spread to neighboring villages and even to the distant capital city. Scholars came to study Ember and interview Emma about the bonding process. Merchants offered ridiculous sums for dragon scales, though Emma always refused. Political leaders sought her opinion on matters related to dragon relations, though she felt woefully unqualified to advise them. Through it all, Ember remained a constant presence, growing larger and stronger with each passing week. Her wings filled out and became powerful enough to carry her short distances. Her scales hardened and began to gleam with the characteristic luster of adult dragons, and her intelligence became more and more apparent. She could not speak in the way humans did, but she understood everything Emma said, and they developed a form of communication that went beyond words. 3 months after the bonding, Emma and Ember were walking through the forest near the village when they encountered trouble. A group of hunters from a distant region had illegally entered the territory, seeking to capture young dragons to sell to collectors. They had not expected to find a human girl with a dragon, and they certainly had not expected that dragon to be under protection. The leader of the hunters, a rough-looking man with scars crossing his face, laughed when he saw Emma and Ember. "Well, well, this makes our job easier. A young one already separated from its clan. We'll take that off your hands, girl." Emma stood her ground, placing herself between the hunters and Ember. "She's not yours to take, and if you have any sense at all, you'll leave this territory immediately." The hunter's laugh died. "Move aside, girl. We don't want to hurt you, but we will if we have to. That dragon is worth a fortune." Ember growled, a sound that was becoming more impressive as she grew. She was now the size of a large dog, with teeth and claws that could do real damage. but she was still young and small compared to the armed men facing them. Emma felt fear spike through her, but she did not move. "Last warning," the hunter said, raising his crossbow. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in the valley. The moment the hunter aimed his weapon at Emma, Ember roared. It was not the small chirp of a baby dragon anymore, but a real roar that shook the trees and sent birds scattering into the sky. And from the mountains beyond, answering roars echoed back. The adult dragons came quickly, and they came in force. Ember's mother arrived first, landing between the hunters and her daughter with earth-shaking impact. But she was not alone. Two other adult dragons circled overhead, their shadows darkening the forest floor. The hunters' faces went white with terror. Ember's mother fixed the leader with those terrible golden eyes. "You threaten what is ours." Her voice resonated in all their minds, cold and filled with rage. "You threaten my daughter and her bonded. Give me one reason why I should not end you where you stand." The hunter dropped his crossbow and fell to his knees. "Please," he begged. "We didn't know. We didn't know she was bonded. Please, mercy." Emma, despite her fear and anger, felt pity stir in her heart. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Ember's mother's massive foreleg. "Let them go," she said quietly. "They're stupid and greedy, but they haven't actually hurt anyone yet. Let them go and spread the word about what happens when someone threatens your family." The dragon looked down at Emma, surprise flickering across its reptilian features. "You would show mercy to those who threaten your life?" "I would show mercy because that's what humans do," Emma said. "At least that's what we should do. You gave me a gift when you gave me Ember. Let me give you a gift in return. Let me show you that humans can be more than just greedy and violent." There was a long silence. Then slowly, Ember's mother nodded. "Very well, they may go, but they will carry a mark, so all will know they threatened what is ours." Before Emma could ask what that meant, the dragon breathed out a thin stream of flame. It did not hurt the hunters, but it singed their clothes and left scorch marks on their skin, permanent reminders of their transgression. Then the dragon growled, a clear dismissal. The hunters ran. They crashed through the forest like frightened rabbits, leaving their weapons and supplies behind in their panic. Emma watched them go, then turned to Ember and hugged the young dragon tightly. "Thank you for protecting me," she whispered. "Thank you for calling your mother." Ember rumbled contentedly and licked Emma's face with her rough tongue. Ember's mother lowered her head and nuzzled Emma gently, a gesture of approval and affection. "You are wise beyond your years, human child," the dragon said. "My daughter chose well. You honor the bond with your actions." As Emma walked back to the village with Ember at her side, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She had gained a companion, a protector, and a family she never could have imagined. But more than that, she had become a bridge between two peoples who had viewed each other with suspicion and fear for generations. It was a heavy responsibility, but as she looked down at Ember, who gazed up at her with complete trust and love, Emma knew she would not trade it for anything. That night, as Emma lay in bed with Ember curled up at her feet, she thought about the future. Ember would continue to grow, eventually becoming as large and powerful as her mother. Emma would age, would change, would face challenges she could not yet imagine. But through it all, they would be together. The bond between them was more than just a magical connection. It was friendship, it was love, and it was a promise that neither of them would ever be alone. Outside, the moon rose over the valley, casting silver light across both human and dragon territories. And in villages and dragon lairs across the land, people and dragons alike were beginning to talk about the girl who called a baby dragon cute and the loyalty she earned. Some saw it as a sign of hope, a chance for a new era of peace. Others saw it as a threat to the old ways, a disruption of the natural order. But everyone agreed on one thing: the world would never be quite the same. The seasons turned, and Ember grew. By the time a year had passed since the bonding, She was the size of a horse, her scales gleaming like polished sapphires in the sun. She could fly for hours without tiring, and her strength was formidable. But she remained gentle with Emma, always careful not to hurt her smaller, frailer companion. The two of them became a familiar sight in the valley, the human girl and her dragon, inseparable and devoted. Emma continued her studies of herbs and healing, but she also began to learn about dragon lore and history from Ember's mother, who visited regularly. The ancient dragon taught her about the magic that flowed through dragon veins, about the complex social structures of dragon clans, and about the long and often painful history between dragons and humans. Emma absorbed it all like a sponge, driven by a desire to understand Ember and her kind as completely as possible. The village prospered under the protection of the dragons. Bandits and raiders avoided the area, knowing that any attack would bring swift, draconic retribution. Trade increased as merchants realized it was safe to travel through the valley. Other villages sent delegations to learn about dragon bonding, hoping to establish similar relationships with dragon clans in their own regions. But not everyone was happy about these changes. In the capital city, there were those who saw the growing bond between humans and dragons as a threat to human independence. They whispered in the halls of power about the danger of becoming dependent on dragons, about the possibility of dragons using their bonded humans as leverage to control human society. These whispers eventually reached the ears of the king, a young man who had inherited his throne only 2 years earlier and was still finding his way as a ruler. King Alexander summoned Emma to the capital, requesting her presence at court. The message was polite but firm, and Emma knew it was not really a request. She discussed it with her mother and with Ember's mother, both of whom advised caution. But in the end, Emma decided to go. She had nothing to hide, and she believed that meeting with the king might help ease fears about dragon bonding. The journey to the capital took 5 days by normal travel, but with Ember flying and Emma riding on her back, they made it in less than 2. It was Emma's first time flying long distances, and despite her nervousness, she found it exhilarating. The world looked so different from above, so vast and beautiful. She could understand why dragons seemed to view the earthbound conflicts of humans and dragons as small and somewhat silly. The capital city of North Haven was impressive, with high walls and towers that reached toward the sky. But it was built for humans, and the guards at the gate looked distinctly uncomfortable as Ember landed in the courtyard. Emma dismounted and patted Ember's neck reassuringly. "Wait here," she said softly. "I shouldn't be long." Ember rumbled unhappily, but settled down in the courtyard, her tail wrapped around her feet. The guards gave her a wide berth as they escorted Emma into the palace. The halls were grand and richly decorated, but Emma found them cold and impersonal compared to the warm simplicity of her village. She was led to a large chamber where the king waited, surrounded by advisors and courtiers. King Alexander was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps 25, with dark hair and intelligent gray eyes. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You're Emma Chen," he said, "the first human in recorded history to bond with a dragon." "Yes, Your Majesty," Emma said, bowing as she had been taught during the hurried etiquette lessons her mother had given her before she left. "Tell me," the king said, leaning forward in his throne, "did you seek out this bond, or did it happen by chance?" Emma told him the whole story, from her unauthorized trip into dragon territory to finding the injured baby dragon to the bonding ceremony in her village square. The king listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. "You understand," he said, "that many of my advisors are concerned about this development. They worry that dragons might use bonded humans as a way to control our society. They worry that we might become dependent on dragon protection and lose our own strength." "With respect, Your Majesty," Emma said carefully, "I think they have it backwards. The bond doesn't give dragons control over humans. It creates a partnership based on mutual respect and affection. Ember doesn't control me, and I don't control her. We choose to help and protect each other because we care about each other. One of the advisors, an older man with a sharp face, spoke up. Pretty words, but how can we be sure? How do we know that the dragons aren't simply being patient, building bonds with humans until they have enough influence to demand whatever they want? Emma felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice level. Because that's not how dragons think. They're not scheming plotters trying to take over human society. They're intelligent, proud beings who value honor and loyalty above everything else. Ember's mother could have killed me a dozen times over, but she didn't. She saw that I helped her daughter, and she rewarded that kindness with trust. And what happens when you die? Another advisor asked. Dragons live for centuries. What happens to young Ember when you're gone? Will she blame humanity? Will she seek revenge? The question hit Emma hard, because it was something she had thought about herself during sleepless nights. She knew that her lifespan was just a fraction of Ember's, that she would grow old and die, while her dragon companion was still in her youth. But she had also discussed this with Ember's mother, and she shared what she had learned. Dragons understand mortality, Emma said. They know that humans don't live as long as they do. When I die, Ember will mourn me, but she won't blame my people. Instead, she'll protect my descendants, if I have any, and she'll honor my memory by continuing to build bridges between our species. That's what the bond means. It's not just between me and Ember, it's between our families, our peoples, for generations to come. The king studied her for another long moment. Then he stood and walked down from his throne, approaching Emma directly. She fought the urge to step back, keeping her ground as he circled her slowly, assessing her. Finally, he stopped in front of her and smiled. You're either very brave or very foolish. I'm not sure which. Probably both, Your Majesty, Emma admitted, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh from the young king. I like you, Alexander said, and I think you might be exactly what this kingdom needs. I'm going to do something that will anger many of my advisors, but I believe it's the right thing to do. He raised his voice so everyone in the chamber could hear. I'm creating a new position, Ambassador to the Dragon Clans, and I'm appointing Emma Chen to fill it. She will serve as the official liaison between the Crown and Dragonkind, with full authority to negotiate treaties and agreements on behalf of the kingdom. The chamber erupted in protest from the advisors, but the king raised his hand for silence. Enough. My decision is made. Emma, you will be given resources and support to help establish formal relations with the dragon clans. You will have a staff, a budget, and my personal backing. In return, I expect you to be honest with me about what the dragons want and need, and to help me build a lasting peace between our peoples. Emma felt overwhelmed. She had come to the capital expecting to defend herself and her bond with Ember. Instead, she was being given responsibility for the entire relationship between humans and dragons. It was terrifying and exciting in equal measure. I accept, Your Majesty, she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I'll do everything in my power to build a true and lasting peace. Over the next 2 years, Emma threw herself into her new role. She traveled extensively, visiting dragon clans across the kingdom and beyond, accompanied always by Ember, who was now fully grown and magnificent. She negotiated trade agreements that allowed dragons to access mineral deposits they needed for their scales, in exchange for protection of human settlements. She established protocols for resolving disputes between humans and dragons. She even helped set up a school where young humans and young dragons could learn together, fostering understanding from an early age. It was exhausting work, and there were failures along with successes. Not all dragons trusted humans, and not all humans were willing to accept dragons as equals. There were incidents, conflicts that sometimes turned violent. But slowly, gradually, progress was made. The old hatreds and fears began to fade, replaced by curiosity and cautious friendship. Through it all, Ember was Emma's constant companion and supporter. The dragon's loyalty never wavered, never faltered. When Emma was tired, Ember gave her strength. When Emma doubted herself, Ember reminded her why they were doing this. And when Emma faced danger from those who opposed the peace she was building, Ember protected her with fierce determination. The bond between them had grown deeper and more complex over the years. Emma could sometimes sense what Ember was feeling, could almost hear her thoughts. And Ember seemed to understand Emma's emotions with uncanny accuracy, responding to needs that Emma hadn't even voiced. It was a partnership that went beyond words, beyond the normal bonds of friendship. It was something entirely new, and it gave Emma hope that other humans and dragons might one day forge similar connections. But there were still those who opposed the peace, who saw the growing cooperation between species as a threat, and they were growing bolder, more desperate. Emma knew that the greatest test of the bond between humans and dragons was yet to come. She could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and dangerous. The crisis came in the spring of the third year after Emma's appointment as ambassador. A radical faction of human supremacists, calling themselves the Pure Kingdom movement, launched a coordinated series of attacks on dragon nesting sites across the kingdom. They used fire and poison and steel, killing dozens of young dragons and destroying countless eggs. The attacks were brutal, calculated, and designed to provoke a violent response from the dragon clans. And they very nearly succeeded. Emma heard about the attacks while she was visiting a clan in the northern mountains. The grief and rage of the adult dragons was palpable, a physical force that made the air shimmer with heat. The clan leader, an ancient dragon named Ironscale, demanded retribution. He wanted to rain fire on human cities, to make the humans pay for what they had done to dragon children. Emma stood before the assembled clan, with Ember at her side, and pleaded for restraint. "This is exactly what they want," she argued. "They want you to attack human settlements. They want to prove that dragons are monsters who can't be trusted. If you do this, you'll be giving them exactly what they need to destroy everything we've built." "They killed our children," Ironscale roared, his voice shaking the mountain. "How can you ask us to show mercy to those who would slaughter the innocent?" "I'm not asking you to show mercy," Emma said, her own voice shaking with emotion. "I'm asking you to show wisdom. Let me find the ones responsible. Let me bring them to justice through human law. Prove that this peace is real, that it's strong enough to survive even this terrible tragedy." Ironscale lowered his massive head until his eye was level with Emma. "And if you cannot deliver justice, what then?" "Then," Emma said, meeting the dragon's gaze steadily, "then I will step aside and let you do what you must. But give me a chance. Please, give me 1 month to find them and see them punished." The dragon studied her for a long moment, then looked at Ember. "What says you're bonded, young one? You have been silent." Ember stepped forward and touched her nose to Emma's hand. Then she looked at Ironscale and made a series of growls and chirps. Emma didn't fully understand the dragon language, but she caught the essence. Trust, loyalty, faith. Ember was vouching for her, putting her own reputation on the line. Ironscale sighed, a sound like wind through a cavern. "Very well. You have 1 month, Emma Chen. Find those responsible and bring them to justice. But know this, if you fail, nothing will stop the fire that will follow." Emma and Ember left the mountain immediately, flying south toward the capital at maximum speed. Emma had some leads, rumors and whispers she had heard about the Pure Kingdom movement. She knew they had support from some of the nobility, from wealthy merchants who resented the trade restrictions that came with dragon treaties. But she needed proof, names, evidence that would stand up in court. King Alexander gave her whatever resources she needed, including a team of investigators and the authority to question anyone, regardless of their rank. Emma worked day and night, following leads, interviewing witnesses, piecing together the conspiracy. Ember rarely left her side. the dragon's presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. With 2 weeks left of the month Ironscale had given her, Emma finally got the break she needed. One of the conspirators, a minor nobleman with gambling debts, agreed to turn informant in exchange for leniency. He gave Emma everything: names, locations, plans for future attacks. The conspiracy went deeper than she had feared, involving several high-ranking officials and even one of the king's own advisors. The arrests were swift and dramatic. Emma personally led the guard to each location, with Ember's intimidating presence ensuring that no one tried to resist or flee. The final arrest was of Lord Chancellor William Drake, the king's most trusted advisor and the secret leader of the Pure Kingdom movement. Drake did not go quietly. As the guards placed him in chains, he turned to Emma with hatred burning in his eyes. "You've doomed us all," he spat. "You and your monster. You've made humans weak, dependent on dragons. We could have been great, could have ruled this land without bowing to beasts, but you've sold us out for your precious peace." Emma felt pity for the man, twisted by his own fear and prejudice. "The only thing I've done," she said quietly, "is show people that there's another way, that we don't have to live in fear and hatred. You're the one who doomed yourself, Lord Chancellor, by choosing violence over understanding." The trials were public and thorough. Emma testified about the attacks, about the dead dragons and destroyed eggs. Dragon witnesses were allowed to speak as well, their testimony given weight equal to that of humans. It was unprecedented, and it sent a clear message. Dragons were not mere animals or property. They were people, with rights and voices that deserved to be heard. All of the conspirators were found guilty. Drake and the other leaders were sentenced to life imprisonment. The lesser members received shorter sentences, but were stripped of their titles and property. Part of their assets were given to the dragon clans as compensation for their losses, a symbolic gesture that meant more than the actual gold and land. Emma delivered the news to Ironscale with 1 day left in the month he had given her. The ancient dragon listened to her report, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he bowed his head to her. "You have done what many thought impossible, Emma Chen. You have delivered justice without fire, without blood. You have honored your word and honored the dead. The dragon clans will remember this." The crisis had passed, but Emma knew it would not be the last. There would always be those who opposed the peace, who wanted to return to the old ways of fear and separation. But something fundamental had changed. Humans had seen humans and dragons working together to solve a problem. They had seen justice applied equally to both species. They had seen that the bond between Emma and Ember was not an isolated thing, but a model for how their two peoples could coexist. Emma returned home to her village exhausted but satisfied. She had been away for almost 2 months, and she longed for the simple comfort of her own bed and her mother's cooking. Ember landed in the village square, now expanded to accommodate her full-grown size, and Emma slid off her back with a grateful sigh. The villagers had prepared a celebration in their honor, a feast to welcome them home. Emma tried to protest that she was too tired, but her mother wouldn't hear of it. "Let them celebrate," her mother said, hugging her tightly. "Let them show you how proud they are. You've earned it." That night, as Emma sat at a table surrounded by friends and family, with Ember curled up nearby and children climbing on her like she was a large, scaly playground equipment, Emma reflected on how much had changed since that day she found a hurt baby dragon in a cave. She had gained not just a companion but a purpose, a calling that was larger than herself. Ember caught her eye and made a soft, rumbling sound, and Emma smiled. The dragon tilted her head, and Emma knew what she was asking. "Yes," Emma said softly, reaching out to stroke Ember's nose. "You're still cute. Even as big as you are now, you're still my cute dragon." Ember's eyes sparkled with amusement and affection, and Emma knew that despite all the politics and the danger and the responsibility, this was what mattered most. The bond between them, built on a foundation of kindness and trust, and a simple compliment given to a hurt baby dragon. It was a bond that had changed the world, and it would continue to do so for as long as both of them lived, and beyond perhaps, in the memories and the example they left behind. Years passed, and the peace between humans and dragons grew stronger. More bonds were formed, though never through force or expectation. Each bond was unique, formed naturally when human and dragon found something special in each other. Emma trained other ambassadors, sharing what she had learned about building trust and resolving conflicts. She wrote extensively about dragon culture and society, helping humans understand the complex and beautiful civilization that had existed alongside their own for millennia. Ember became something of a legend herself, not just for being the first bonded dragon, but for her own actions and character. She was fierce in battle when Emma needed protection, but gentle with children and young dragons. She served as a bridge between her own kind and humans, translating concepts and customs that would otherwise remain mysterious. And her loyalty to Emma never wavered, never faltered, even as the years took their toll on Emma's human body. Emma lived to be 73 years old, a good long life by human standards. She remained active as ambassador almost until the end, though in her final years she trained her successor, a young man named Thomas, who had bonded with a dragon of his own. When Emma's health finally failed, she spent her last days in the village where it had all begun, with Ember curled protectively around her bed. On the morning Emma died, she woke to find Ember watching her with those same golden eyes that had gazed up at her in the cave so many years ago. "Don't be sad," Emma whispered, reaching up to touch Ember's face one last time. "We had a good run, didn't we? We changed the world." Ember rumbled softly, a sound full of grief, but also of acceptance. She knew this day was coming. Dragons understood the cycle of life and death better than most. But understanding did not make it easier. Emma had been her first friend, her bonded, her human. The one who called her cute when she was small and hurt. The one who stayed with her, protected her, loved her. Emma had given Ember purpose and showed her what it meant to build rather than destroy, to reach out rather than withdraw. Emma's mother and the other villagers gathered around the bed as Emma took her last breath. There was crying and mourning, but also a sense of completion. Emma had lived a full life, had done great things, had been loved and had loved in return. As human deaths went, it was a good one. Ember's grief was deep and profound. For weeks after Emma's death, the dragon barely moved from the spot where Emma was buried, in a grove near the village that overlooked the valley. Other dragons came to keep vigil with her, including her mother, but Ember remained silent and still, lost in her mourning. But slowly, as the seasons turned, Ember began to emerge from her grief. She remembered Emma's final words about having changed the world, and she realized that the best way to honor Emma's memory was to continue the work they had started together. Ember became a teacher, sharing her knowledge with young humans and dragons alike. She protected Emma's descendants, watching over them as she had watched over Emma. And she told Emma's story to anyone who would listen, ensuring that the girl who called a dragon cute would never be forgotten. The bond had been eternal, just as promised. Not because Emma lived forever, but because what they built together, the bridge between two peoples, would endure long after both of them were gone. In every human who befriended a dragon, in every dragon who trusted a human, Emma and Ember's legacy lived on. The loyalty that began with a simple act of kindness in a cave had transformed the world, and would continue to do so for generations to come. Ember lived for another 300 years after Emma's death, and in all that time, she never forgot the girl who saw beauty where others saw only fear, who offered help instead of harm, who called her cute and meant it with all her heart. And when Ember finally passed from the world, old and content and surrounded by friends of both species, her last thought was of Emma and of the day their bond began. It had been eternal, in all the ways that truly mattered.